You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today, another one of these short little shows. I'm looking at players who probably should be dropped across fantasy basketball leagues. Now, obviously your situation will vary. You might have a different setup, you might have a different format, you might have a really weak team and players on the waiver wire aren't better, but in general, the players I'm going to talk about on today's show are guys who you at least should be heavily considering dropping, whether that's to open up a stream spot, whether that's to add a hot free agent from that bunch of guys that I talked about on yesterday's mini-sode. So any of that sort of stuff, these are the guys who are on or in that drop zone, as I often like to call it. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. Let's start with Terrence Ross of the Orlando Magic. He has not been good at all. He's currently the 249th ranked player so far this season. Now, I think he's going to be significantly better than what he has been. He's averaging only 8.7 points. We have to really look at these things and go, what's causing him to be so far down? Well, he's shooting 27% and 19% from three. We know those numbers are going to jump back up. He was a 38.3% three-point shooter last season, 43 overall from the field. And while he's not a high percentage guy, he's not a 27% guy because absolutely nobody is. So those numbers are set to increase at some point. His rebounds, his assists, his steals, his free throw rate, his free throw percentage, that's all really sort of in line with what we expect from him. But the conversion of his shots, the volume of three-pointers has put him right down. But in saying that, with how they're using him, playing him only 22 minutes a night, last season he played 27 minutes a night. So I was under the impression heading into drafts that in your 11th or 12th round, getting this guy could come in and hit 2.5 threes, get 12, 13 points, it can be valuable. But if they're playing him 4 or 5 fewer minutes per game, then it's not. And he just becomes a stream guy who I do still think will come in and hit 2 threes a game. But that's not as valuable as the 2.7 that he hit last season and the 15 points he scored last year if he's scoring 11 points. It's not as valuable, and his spot can be better used as a streaming position. So the addition of the Chief Al-Farouq Aminu,
Sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
it has really impacted Terrence Ross because Aminu is getting those minutes at the three that Ross would have normally gotten. And that's pushed him down from that 26.5 minutes that he played last year down to just 22 so far. And he's been dropped quite a bit over the last day or so, but his roster percentage was up at like 56 yesterday. It has dropped down to 46 today, but he's still on quite a few 12-team league rosters. DeAndre Jordan is another guy that I think is not a must-roster player. He is the 172nd ranked player so far this season. 22 minutes a night, 6.5 points, 10 rebounds, 1.2 blocks. The annoying thing with him is the free throw percentage has regressed down to 47% and 55% from the field. So the last couple of games from Jordan have been strong. There's no doubt about that. 10-10 with 4 blocks. Actually, the one before that wasn't that good, 6-7, but the one before that, 8-17. He's had double-digit rebounds in 4 of his 6 games, but the free throws have been a concern. The 4 blocks are nice, but if we take that out, which it does look like an outlier, he had 3 blocks in the season's first 5 games. He's not that blocks guy anymore. His efficiency's dropped off. He hasn't played more than 23 minutes in a game outside of that game against the Pistons where he matched up against Andre Drummond and played 30. He can probably get a little bit better than what he is now. The field goal percentage could come back up, but maybe it doesn't. He was at 64 each of the last 2 seasons. He's at 55 now, so that can jump back up, but I just don't see the minutes for Jordan. And he's rostered in 73% of leagues. I think some of that's due to his aggressive pre-rank heading into the year where I believe he was, I know on ESPN he was about 70th or 40th or something absolutely bananas. But on Yahoo, he was still in that mode of being a 12-team league guy. A roster percentage of 73 would indicate that he is rostered in way too many 12-team leagues, and I think his spot is much better as a streaming option. You could look to sell him high if someone else wants to buy into the past version of DeAndre Jordan, but I don't see him as a 12-team league must-roster player. J.J. Redick is struggling. And a lot of these guys are older players, and we talk about drop-offs coming, and they come in, and we don't necessarily... Maybe that's what's happening with Mike Conley. But this is what happens to these older players, is that drop-offs come. He's 35 years of age, J.J. Redick. He's playing only 24 minutes a night, 10 points, 2.5 triples per game, and the 194th ranked player. And this is an elite shooter. He's still shooting the same amount of, or same percentage of threes that he did last year. 39.7 last season, 39.5 this year. No difference. That's the same. The three-point volume is relatively similar as well. In fact, per 36, he's actually attempting more threes. But he went from 31 minutes a game down to 24. The Pelicans have Lonzo Ball. They have Drew Holiday. Then there's guys like Frank Jackson and Josh the Hitman Hart coming off the bench. Kendrick Williams playing at the 3. When Zion Williamson comes back, that's even fewer minutes for J.J. Redick. So I just don't see him pushing anywhere close to that 30-minute range. Like Terrence Ross, he can be a three-point streamer, and I do think that his two-pointers are going to go in at a better rate. He's at 36% so far, where he was at 50% each of the last 2 seasons. So there's significant room for growth in that area. But outside of that, he just isn't doing enough to be considered a must-roster guy. His value comes from being a scorer who hits threes, and the scoring is way down, the efficiency's down, the minutes are down. It's not encouraging stuff from Redick, even though I do think that he will be better than what he has been for the beginning of the year. And the next couple of names I got on the list, Steph Curry and Zach Collins. These are long-term injuries. Now, with both of these guys, and I say this all the time, if you're in a roto league with games limits, your bench is your injured reserve. So you might have 3 or 4 injured reserve spots. So you keep Steph there. Zach Collins, probably not as interesting given he's going to be out for months and his ceiling was maybe top 90. Yeah, holding on to a guy like that. But again, if you've got the roster space, hold on to him. But if there's someone else out there that you want to go and add and use that spot, then for Collins, it makes sense. In a daily changes league for head-to-heads, Steph Curry, it's really hard to hold on to him. Look, try and trade him by all means. I know if someone offered me a trade of Steph Curry, I probably wouldn't take it. He's going to be out 3 months, minimum. November, December, January. That puts him around the All-Star break for a return. The Warriors are going to be out of it. They're already out of it now. They won't be rushing him back. I do think that Steph will return before the end of this season, no doubt. And a fully healthy Steph as a top 10 guy, which he hasn't been this season, but he obviously could get to that level. He's the 22nd ranked player so far this season. In the playoffs is interesting. But in a daily changes league without an injured reserve spot, a 0 for 3.5 months, you're running 12 players versus the opposition running 13. You won't be in the playoffs. It's as simple as that. So in a lot of these cases, you have to bite the bullet. And you can tell me, and I will agree with you, that you cannot find a player like Steph Curry on the waiver wire. Like, no shit. Everybody knows that. But the 70 games that you get by streaming that spot through over the 3 months, that's enough. That's enough to get you into a playoff discussion. If you're sitting down the bottom and you've got Steph, you're not going to get in there by being down the bottom. Now, if you're at the top and you've won this last week without Curry in your lineup, then good on you. Actually, maybe keep him because you've got a strong enough team. But if you're struggling, getting those games in to push you into the playoffs and then maybe making a grab of Steph in January or February is probably going to be the way to go. There's no point holding on to go, well, when the playoffs come, I'm going to kill it, and then you're not there. Because that will generally be what happens when you're holding zeros for 3. And it's 1-0. But that is implying that you go through the rest of the season with absolutely 0 injuries, which, of course, is never going to happen. So instead of having, it's a bad week, I got 2 injuries, you add Steph onto that, you got 3 injuries, and then you're screwed in that week, or you got 4 injuries, and it just adds on top of it. It's not like you've got one bloke missing, because you will have other guys, and that just, you got one guy versus 2, that's double the impact in terms of injury. So that is important to note. Paul Millsap, the next guy I want to talk about as a guy that can be dropped in most formats. 124th so far on the season, which looks okay, and it is okay. But how much better can we expect Millsap to get from there? If you're 124th, you're not in the best 120 players, which in a 12-team league is all the active spots. He's averaging 12 and 5. He's getting a 0.7 steals, 0.7 blocks, and he's hitting a really high rate from the free throw line. And Millsap is not a good free throw shooter. 73, 70, 77, 76 the last 3 seasons. He's at 94. His only positive contribution category in fantasy this season is free throw percentage. It has a Z score of 0.93. If that goes back to his previous levels, where it was negative 0.54, that is a huge swing, and that drops him down to about 170th, 160th, and that's not worth it. And it is going to drop. He's not going to all of a sudden become a 94% three-point shooter when every year he's been mid-70s, every single year. So, again, another one of these older players, the drop-off's coming, under 26 minutes a game. You are much better off using Paul Millsap's roster spot to stream guys in. The next couple of guys may be a little bit controversial. Spencer Dinwiddie and the Padawan Colin Sexton. Both of these guys as guards who can put up some decent numbers. Their rankings so far this season haven't been impressive. And it's all about having a look at these guys and seeing where is the upside. Now, Dinwiddie's 152nd ranked player this year, averaging 15 points and 5 assists. That's really valuable. But the shooting remains a concern with him. No steals or no blocks. He never gets those. The assists are nice. He's a low rebounder. So he's really providing value in those categories. But if you're not looking at points and assists, then what is Dinwiddie actually providing? I still think he can be good, but I don't think he's a top 100 player. Now, people will scream handcuff. I'm not a big believer in handcuffing in fantasy unless the player himself has value in their own right. And Dinwiddie's barely holding on to that value in his own right to be that guy. As I said, the 152nd ranked player. If it wasn't anyone who didn't have the name cachet of Spencer Dinwiddie, he'd be dropped most likely. He is rostered still in 69% of leagues.
Giggity!
I think in most cases you hold, but he's absolutely in their discussion for a drop. While Colin Sexton, 177th ranked player, 30 minutes a night, 17 points. The 17 points is great, and then there's nothing. Hasn't blocked a shot, half a steal, 2 assists, 3.5 boards, only 72% from the line. Now that will go up, I'm pretty sure. Their shooting, which was so good last year, has dropped off down to 34.5% from 3 this season. And this is something we talked about with Sexton in the offseason, the upside with Garland there, with Kevin Love playing a full season, the upside for him to go bananas and have that big usage that he had down the stretch of last season just isn't there. And basically, his numbers are almost identical to what he did last year. And what he did last year was shit for all of the season, apart from the last 2 months. The points are the same. The threes are the same. The rebounds, he's at 0.6 more. He's at 1 fewer assist. His steals are the same. His blocks are the same. His field goal percentage is the same. And the difference is he's 12 percentage points worse on his free throws. So he is, in a 10-team league, he's a definite drop. And in a 12, again, if you're not looking for those points, he's offering absolutely nothing else. And the last guy I want to talk about is Danny Green, who started out the season on fire. We did caution that we sort of know what Danny Green does, and that is he goes out, he'll have this big game, and then he'll disappear. And he's so far the 116th ranked player, which is fine. 11 points, 2.7 threes, 1.3 blocks. On a positive note, Green has significant room to improve his free throws. He's at 60% when he's at 84 last year. His blocks, where he was at 0.7 last year, he's at 0.3 this season, but he's not a rebounder. He doesn't get assists. The threes are fine. The scoring's there. There is some room for improvement with Green, but we sort of look at him more, and I think we should look at him more as a streaming type option versus a guy that we absolutely just have to hold on to in every single circumstance. So there's a bunch of guys that are rostered in a lot of 12-team leagues who I reckon you guys can consider dropping to grab some of those hot free agents. Someone like maybe an Isaiah Thomas, who is going to be starting for the Washington Wizards today. Subscribe to this podcast. Make sure you get my recap show, which will come out after the last game today. Follow me on Twitter at @RedRock_Beeble and Instagram at LockedOnFantasyBasketball. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.